For the Educating Others project, I was able to get a hold of 7 students. So let's hear their perspectives on the MI or the 5MIweekly videos and hear some of their information.
I watched this video called Comprehensive Sex Education's Effects on Racism. And what made me choose said video is because I have very passionate roots in civil and human rights. So this was really interesting to listen about the systemic behaviors that transmute across both sexual education and racism. The most important thing that I learned was the comprehensive approach towards sexual education. Sex education should be comprehensive, and it's like she had, I'm going to quote her, it's the golden standard. Now that I have learned this, I am going to start researching more about the ties. Like, this is an interesting, just 8 minutes is not enough for me. Like, just like 8 minutes of this is not enough. I need to know more, so I'm gonna do more research. It's actually motivating me to do more research on this topic and how, like, it was interesting to learn that the sexual assault in Black communities, which is prevalent, would decrease with sexual education in a comprehensive manner. So that was really interesting. Thank you.
Next person I'm interviewing today is Jorge. And Jorge, what video did you end up watching from the 5MIweeklies?
The I remember the name.
Oh no.
Public opinion of sex ed. That one. Sorry, I have to go back to it.
It's all right. And what made you choose to watch this video?
Because I find the difference between conservative, non-conservatives uh, thought of sex ed interesting. So I wanted to see what this guy had to say about it.
And what was the most important thing you learned from this video?
I thought it was really interesting that as far as like some of the studies show that for as different as the media wants to make us believe that uh, the idea of sex education is like frowned upon by conservatives, really it's not that big of a difference between conservatives and non-conservatives when it comes to sex education, that most are for a comprehensive uh, way of teaching it, which I think is smart. But yeah, it was kind of interesting to see that the numbers aren't really as skewed as uh, they're presented sometimes. Yeah.
And based on this information that you've learned, how are you going to go forward with this information?
So I think it actually just opens up like a different avenue, like or a more opportunity to be able to feel like it's a topic that's able to be discussed across the board versus just with people that kind of have your same mindset. So it's like, instead of thinking that maybe this conversation that could be a pain point for somebody that would be a little bit more conservative, knowing that kind of makes it something more that's kind of on the table.
Yeah, it just makes it more freely and easily to speak to it rather than being almost like hush hush, or if
Yeah,
it's kind of
exactly.
almost taboo that we don't want to talk about
Yeah,
it anymore.
yeah,
But all right, well, awesome. Thank you so much for your time. I hope you have a good rest of your day.
yeah. Thanks a lot. Have a good one.
So my next guest I have here to interview is Mel. And Mel, what video did you decide to watch from the 5MIweekly?
I watched sex ed today.
Okay. And what made you choose that video?
I was just kind of interested to see what topics would come up for, sex education and today's standards, just because I know we don't have the best sex education system in Texas. So kind of curious to see what topics that brought on.
And what was the most important thing you learned from that video?
I would definitely say the amount of states that don't have comprehensive sex ed programs. And one little kind of I guess, tidbit that popped up was that I think it was three states that if they were to talk about sexual orientation, they were only allowed to talk about negative things of sexual orientation. So that was a really shocking fact to find out.
Now, based on this information that you've learned from the videos, like how do you plan to use this information going forward?
Well, I actually want to be a big advocate for comprehensive sex ed in the future. I didn't realize how little states didn't, do comprehensive sex ed. So with this information, it definitely kind of is an eye opener of how much harder I need to push to make sure that we could at least get, if not all the states, at least over half, maybe like a third of the states, using comprehensive sex ed.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. It's much appreciated.
Of course, thank you.
The next interviewee that I have for the 5MI Weekly is Angelica Payne, and she's going to go ahead and answer some questions for me to add on this video. So, what video did you end up watching?
Sex, Marriage, and the Bible.
Okay. And what made you choose that video?
I think the Bible has a lot of information in it in the Old Testament and New Testament pertaining to sexual relations that either overlap or contradict one another. And so I just wanted to hear a little bit about the take on the professor's perspective.
And what did you learn from that video?
I guess basically what I just mentioned, that there's some that overlap, there's some that contradict one another. There's so many ways to take all of these statements from the Bible in understanding sexual relations and understanding marriage. And um, it really just dies down to how the reader chooses to, or how they might interpret that information, and what they want to take in and implement in their daily lives. But yeah, it's give or take. It just depends on the reader. Yeah, just a lot of information that it's just ties down to choosing.
So now that you've learned this information from that video, how do you plan going forward to use that information that you learned?
Definitely what the professor had continuously stated throughout the video, which is just encouraging individuals to, if they're wanting to understand marriage and sexual relations pertaining to the Bible, then to not necessarily depend on others to help them understand, but to read it themselves. Um, or even if they just want to read it, generally speaking, yeah, just making sure to take it upon themselves to look at all that information.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And I have Eric with me today, who ended up watching some videos for me. And thanks for coming into this interview. So, what video did you watch from 5MI Weekly?
I watched What Sexual Orientation is Normal.
Okay. And what made you choose that video?
I'm just curious on the thoughts on it. There's a lot of polarizing thoughts when it comes to sexual orientation, so I was curious.
Okay. What important information did you learn from that video?
It's pretty normal, evolutionary speaking, to be gay. That's one of the things I learned.
And now that you've learned this, how are you going to use this information going forward?
I think what the purpose of the video was to destigmatize a lot of ideas regarding straight man, straight woman getting married. So I think in practice, I would probably just assume, people are just being evolutionary beings and animals. I think like just looking at people in a different light is what the video is going to make me do. Really.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time, Eric. I appreciate you.
All right, brother. I appreciate you. Bye.
All right, there we are. There we are. All right, I watched the Why Sex Ed video
Okay. And what
with
made you
Dr. Don.
and what made you choose that video?
Um, I thought it was a good starting point. I knew bits and pieces here and there, but I wanted to get to the root of why.
And what was one of the most important things that you learned from those videos?
The most important thing I learned was to just use simple language. You know, sex doesn't have to be sugar coated. It doesn't have to. You don't have to use all these euphemisms and various things to just talk about a topic that should be simple.
And now that you've learned this, like, how are you going to use this information going forward?
I'm gonna use this to be more bold and also watch what language I use. If I notice myself sugarcoating or kind of dancing around a topic, you can just say like, "Oh, dick, vagina." You don't have to just say like, "Oh, it's
Uh, Today I got Susie with me, who will be interviewed in regards to her choices for the 5MI weekly videos. And what videos did you end up watching?
I watched What is Sex Ed and History of Sex Ed.
And what made you choose those videos?
Um, I wanted to understand what sex ed is, as I didn't have a concrete definition for it personally, and I wanted to also watch sexual history to gather background context on what sex ed was in the past to bring myself up to date for what we understand it right now.
Awesome. And what's the most important thing that you learned from the videos?
There was a list of unintended consequences of sexual illiteracy that Dr. Don displayed in the video, and that really drove the point home on how important it is for everyone to be sexually educated. In History of Sex Ed, it spoke about how sex was deemed immoral in the past, especially within religious literature. Dr. Don spoke of Adam and Eve and the tree of good and evil, where nakedness and awareness was connected to evil.
Awesome. And like based off the information that you learned from these videos, like how do you plan on using this going forward?
Because sex ed seems widely misunderstood and it's still seen as an uncomfortable topic due to its moral roots, it is good to be able to explain to others the benefits of sexual literacy to avoid the unintended consequences that was displayed in that list.
All right, awesome. Was that anything else? That was pretty much everything you had?
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
All
It
right.
was good videos. I like the Bill Nye vibes.
Sexual Bill Nye is what I call Dr. Dom.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you so much.
Alrighty, take care.
All right, bye bye. And my last interviewee for this 5MI Weekly is going to be Sienna. And Sienna, thanks for helping out today. I appreciate it. So, which video did you watch today?
I watched Public Opinion of Sex Ed.
Okay. And what made you choose this video?
The pictures that were on the like the
The thumbnail?
I couldn't tell you what it's called. Yeah, on the thumbnail, it looked very interesting because of the numbers that were appearing onto there. So it grabbed my attention a little bit more than the other ones.
And what was one of the most important things you learned on that particular video?
That there are different sides when coming to people and like the way we think, but ultimately we all have the same end goal, and it's having everybody know and be educated on sex ed.
Okay. So now that you learned this, so how are you going to use this information going forward?
Being able to know the studies of like how we all come together and just thinking about how we all stand on like what is important for us to learn. I think I could be like open to talking about it with other people. Like, yeah, we could do this together and we should be able to learn more about what's going on rather than having to just learn kind of like on our own.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your input. I really appreciate it, and have a good rest of your day.
Thanks. You too.
Well, that was the end of my interviewees that took the time to get interviewed for the 5MI weeklies. And just to kind of close out and share my ideas of if I think being psychologically and sexually educated is important. I do believe it's important. I do believe it's important to get the norm just the norm. I think being able to not use euphemisms or just other words that don't relate to the actual meaning of that term, I think we're just being off in the wrong direction, and it's making it harder for individuals to understand what's actually going on. The other thing, too, with comprehensive teaching as well as um, uh, I just feel that research wise, there's so much available in the positive factor that comprehensive sexual education is so much better in terms of less pregnancies, less STIs and STDs being passed around than going the other route. So and then of course just goes to show too that without the proper research, it leads into things like individuals having their clitoris removed because they were unsure based on one of the other 5MI weeklies that we went over. So I believe that it's very important to be educated and understanding of what's actually happening and how we can move forward. And again, let the norm just be the norm, and no more just no pun intended, but beating around the bush.